Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. We are continuing our discussion today on doing a direct reading from Astrology Karma and Transformation by Stephen Roy. It's going to be continuing the third chapter in the series, but if you are watching this video, if you're just looking for the goods on Uranus, feel free to watch this. You don't need to listen to the before videos to hear the context, because this is just good, juicy stuff. But this is a continued reading from our series. So thank you to everybody who's joining and watching. As usual, this is a live stream, so if you have any thoughts, concerns, comments, questions, feel free to leave them, and I'll see if I can speak to them when I can. Continuing our reading, we are now getting into Uranus. How does Uranus relate as a key to transformation? Stephen Arroyo continues on the subject of Uranus. The planet Uranus symbolizes a force that manifests as sudden changes of life pattern, sudden alterations of consciousness, flashes of insight, and quick bursts of new ideas and original conceptions. Uranus can be conceived of as a channel through which powerful forces flow into awareness with electric rapidity. Uranus also manifests as impulses toward independence, rebellion, the erratic, the unconventional, the original, and the unexpected. The influence of Uranus does not make a person particularly stable, but it does make them a channel through which new ideas may be born, especially if it's in proper aspect to the right things and the person has a good Saturn in their chart. They can be an open vessel to a controlled chaos of constructive, transformative power. When Uranus is strong in a chart, that factor symbolized by the planet or planets in aspect to Uranus are electrified, magnetized, highly energized, and, if all goes well, illuminated. We therefore see that Uranus acts electrically in sudden impulses. This power is needed to burst through the Saturnian ego defenses and the thought barriers of the conscious mind. Contrary to some views, Uranus doesn't always act destructively. It manifests as destruction only when there is resistance to its influence. Since some form of resistance is usually present, however, especially if Uranus is involved in stressful aspects, a transit of Uranus is often experienced as highly disruptive. It's funny how people with Uranus posited in important parts of their chart often can't help experiencing ecstatic, disruptive transformations and annoying disruptions in their life, so that it comes to a point where a huge disruption can happen for them, or they could even cause it, but they're like, oh, duh, I'm Uranus, hello, so whatever, and they get used to it, and then it's disruptive to other people, and it's disruptive. But the subjective feeling is that I'm ready for this disruption, and I'm ready to be different and transform and be unique and original, because I'm used to it. By transit, Uranus cuts away the old and revolutionizes one's way of being in the area indicated. It brings sweeping changes that have the effect of reorganizing, often disorganizing at first, one's consciousness in order to permit new growth to come forth. Psychologically, it bursts into awareness in the form of whatever ideas, feelings, and realizations were subliminal, i.e., just below the threshold of consciousness. So Uranus's transits, therefore, are inimical to repression of any kind. If an individual has been living in a repressed manner, a mode of life in which vital elements of his or her nature have been blocked, neglected, or ignored, it is almost certain that a transit of Uranus by conjunction, square, or opposition to one of the personal planets will bring to the surface with great immediacy an intense confrontation with these parts of the person's nature. It's like I said, a long-standing strand of unconscious material is now suddenly exploding in the face of these other strands of our conscious material, revealing the nature of their alchemy. Uranus always speeds up the rhythm of nature, and hence, an individual experiencing one of these transits is often wired, excitable, restless, and driven by an overwhelming desire for change and freedom. Uranus, at its best, is the great liberator, the awakener, the illuminator, which stirs up the person's inner and outer life with such intensity that things are never the same afterwards. The planet Uranus may be likened to the mythological figure of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and thus enabled human beings to extend the reach of their knowledge. That's awesome. I knew that Uranus was ruled by Prometheus, that it symbolized Prometheus and that genius fire, the absolute intuitive awareness of all that is. Most people have the urge during transits of Uranus to act out their needs for excitement, freedom, and experimentation. They will often make radical moves to change what they perceive to be a stifling life situation. A small percentage of people, however, will experience Uranus transits almost totally on an inner level, during which they will subtly revolutionize their attitude, understanding, and mode of self-expression in the areas indicated. Their outer life will frequently reflect this new, awakened approach to life, but in these cases it's by no means always readily apparent or direct in the material cosmos. During Uranus transits, the individual often has an impulse to run away from life situations which are seen to be inhibiting or frustrating to their individualistic self-expression. But it is sometimes a more constructive approach, assuming that the life situation is fundamentally sound and vitally flexible, for the person to experiment with radical changes within the confines of the old situation, whether it be a marriage, job, or whatever. It's like Uranus is like an acid being held in a beaker, and you don't want it's a strong acid, but you don't want it to be so strong that it melts the container that's holding it. You want to use it constructively in the right places and hopefully not burn the hand of the very thing that's holding it. The broadening of self-understanding that can result from such a challenge is often far greater than would be gained from merely throwing over the old and jumping excitedly into the new and different. This is talking about, hoping for that vitally flexible life situation where you can experiment with this radical consciousness and not blow it up. This is, of course, not to deny that a total revolution or repolarization in some area of life is sometimes necessary. Sometimes the obliterating of Uranus is meant to melt that beaker that contains it. If that layer of snake skin was looking to go for a long time, you know? In many cases, the influence of Uranus can be defined culturally, for Uranus starts where Saturn ends, literally. Saturn marks the boundary of personal ego consciousness, symbolizing the collective cultural norms and standards, a kind of cultural superego in Freudian terms. Saturn is thus rigid and contracted. Uranus, on the other hand, bursts through this old structure with revolutionary impulses. And the rigidity of the Saturnian boundary usually causes it to crack and be rent asunder. The psychological manifestations of the Uranian forces, as experienced by the individual, are not only quite comprehensible, but also even invigorating to the mind that is open to the new. In ancient astrology, the planet Mercury was known as the messenger of the gods, a term which sounds quite similar to Rudyard's description of the Trans-Saturnian planets as ambassadors of the galaxy. Mercury was, at that time, associated with the creative faculty in human beings. Of course, ancient astrologers, as far as we know, had no knowledge of the existence of Uranus. Still, many of the alchemists were aware of a creative function deeper or higher than the level of the rational mind, which is the primary meaning of Mercury in modern astrology. These alchemists of ancient days associated this creative activity with the occult meaning of Mercury as the unifier of opposites. From our modern perspective, we might well wonder if they were referring to the function of Uranus, but had no such planetary glyphs or symbols to express what they experienced. This hypothesis seems all the more likely in light of the fact that numerous modern astrologers are now asserting that, in contrast to the ancient Greek version of Mercury's exaltation and dignity in Virgo, Mercury's exaltation should be considered to be in Aquarius, the Uranus sign. Wow, that's whack. I don't know about that. I think that Mercury's exaltation in Virgo is too set. Yeah, that's an interesting one anyway, if that's what was a cool thing happening in 1992. Mercury's exaltation being debatably considered to be in Aquarius, the rising, the Uranus sign. I should just always note that I'm always very wary of anything that kind of asserts a sign rulership for the outer planets, because again, the outer planets are not of the zodiac. At least I don't think that they've been necessarily evidently shown to be so. I know a lot of people think Uranus is ruled by Aquarius, or rules Aquarius. Anyway, I digress. You can look at my own videos to see my opinions on this, but for now, let's just keep reading what Stephen Arroyo has given in this book. Dane Rudyard, in his profound and inspiring book Triptych, refers to Uranus as the creative power of the universal spirit. Rudyard says that Uranus refers to the stage of personal transfiguration, and that the transfigured individual has become a focal center for the release of the power of the universal mind. He also states that Uranus can be conceived of as the voice of God, the creative power of the mystic sound that, according to the old tradition of India, pervades all spaces. It's at this point I'd like to point out I'm a Vedic astrologer myself, and there's a big tradition. Consider, if you know the symbolism of Brahma, the original creator of this world, it is said that Uranus represents Brahma, the intuition of all knowledge that ever it will be, the Akashic record keeper in a way. So that's supposedly Uranus represents that Brahma. The power of the universal mind is evident in the extraordinarily quick perceptions that accompany a Uranian attunement. This comes from the ability to gain knowledge and insight from other dimensions through a heightened psychic sensitivity. Uranus represents intuitive insight in the extension of the rational process beyond the barriers of space and time. The experimentation toward which the Uranus energies urge an individual comes from this inner sense that there are no boundaries to human knowledge. Even knowledge, timeless glyphs of eternal wisdom can permeate our minds just by us surveying them. It comes from the inner faith that an individual has the capacity to understand life in a more comprehensive way, and that he or she has the divine right to pursue this knowledge, no matter what conventional wisdom may dictate. It's all within you already. It's the meaning of that classic Tao Te Ching poetic verse that George Harrison sings in the Beatles. Without looking out my door, I can know all things on earth. Without looking out my window, I can know the ways of heaven. For the farther one travels, the less one knows. It's a classic Tao Te Ching wisdom. So, naturally, many Uranians may become so absorbed in the excitement of discovery and experimentation that they commonly go into fanaticism, an utter disregard for tradition, and a willful obstinacy, something to keep in mind. This intuition of which Uranian people are capable is not incompatible with logic, however. Grant Louis pointed out over 30 years ago that Uranus operates in a very logical way, but that the logic works so fast that it appears to be intuition. He also wrote that Uranus represents the extension of perception into realms of superconscious mentality, which we can interpret as the ability to tune in on the universal mind's archetypal level of knowledge. This reminds me very much of Timothy Leary's Game of Life. He gives the example of how the periodic table of elements that we know in chemistry, they were figured out by a man who was obsessed with the tarot. He saw the organization of the tarot cards and he was obsessed with them. His name was Mendeleev. And this Mendeleev character, in noticing that there were patterns in numerology and in the deck cards of the tarot, he was a chemist, and he intuited, just through the mystical apprehension of the fact that it might be a thing, he intuited that the natural flow of organic and molecular chemical compounds relate and interact with each other through given through given mathematical interchanges, which can be formulated in a system. And that's what the periodic table of elements represents. He just intuited that this was a thing, and we now understand it to be logic. We now understand the logic. We as humans don't know where that logic came from. The process just appeared to the guy. This is how Uranus often works. Once one goes past the boundaries of Saturn and ventures into the realms of Uranus and Neptune, all dualities, all oppositions perceived due to limited logic, and all separate forms begin to disappear. There begins at that point to be a merger of dichotomies, which in Uranian perception manifests as seeing things to be both and, rather than either or. In other words, the opposites of the materialistic logical mind are seen together in one flash of immediate perception as parts of one whole comprehensive perspective on life. The house position of Uranus shows us where one can potentially experience and use this awakening power, where sudden changes, insights, and a feeling of needing broad personal freedom are felt most immediately. This house shows where one has an urge to depart from conventional norms of expression, and where one will often reject tradition and useless encumbrances in order to do so. And they will probably encounter encumbrances. Depending on where Uranus is, it's always going to be too fast of a river, and no one is ever ready. Nothing in your energy field is ever ready for it, and it causes a disruptive opening, causes things to change and transform, but leaves an open channel for power in its wake. Wherever Uranus is in your chart, the house will be that gateway. Whatever the house means to you, to the planet that rules it, to the cusps that are in it, etc. If one has Uranus in an angular house, there will usually be an especially strong urge to act out one's unconventionality in an obvious, dynamic way. I would also suggest that if the dispositor of Uranus or Neptune or Pluto is in an angle, that has the same effect. I'm a Leo rising. My Uranus and Neptune are in Capricorn, and Saturn is their dispositor because Saturn rules Capricorn. And Saturn in my chart is in the 7th house in Aquarius, right? So my 7th house, my Saturn, is in an angle and is channeling this transformative data as well. If Uranus is in succedent or cadent houses, on the other hand, the person may have just as strong an urge towards revolutionary or unconventional impulses, but they may put those feelings to work in their everyday life in a subtler way, while perhaps appearing quite conservative on the surface. Somehow channeling, funneling, venting these gross, dark psychic agents in the unconscious, putting them places where you don't have to deal with them directly. That's what happens when these planets are not in any angular houses at all. They might still be slithering through your experience. You just don't have as direct of a relationship with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Uranus on this part of our reading. Next up, I'm going to end this video here at the 25-minute mark, and then next up, we're going to start talking specifically about Neptune and what Neptune means as an agent, as a key in the transformation of our consciousness. I might have a snack too. So I'm going to be about 5 minutes, folks. And for those watching live, feel free to continue watching. I'm going to